The dust cloud rose before Katherine Morgan even heard the crack, a sound like thunder splitting the earth. And in the single heartbeat, it took her to look up from the water barrel. The roof of the abandoned mining office came down on top of her with the weight of a collapsing world. Everything went black and red at once. Pain exploded through her left leg, her shoulder, her ribs. Katherine tried to scream, but the air had been punched from her lungs, replaced by dust so thick it turned her mouth to clay. She could not move, could not breathe, could not think past the crushing pressure that pinned her body against the splintered floorboards like a butterfly mounted for display. When her vision cleared enough to make sense of the darkness, Katherine realized she could see a sliver of daylight through the rubble about 3 feet from her face. Her right arm was free from the elbow down, and she could turn her head slightly to the left, though each movement sent lightning bolts of agony down her spine. Everything else, her entire body, was trapped beneath what felt like half a mountain of broken timber, adobe, and the tin roofing that had made up the structure of the old Copper Queen mining office on the outskirts of Agua Caliente, Arizona. She had been such a fool. Her father had warned her a dozen times that the abandoned buildings scattered around the old mine works were dangerous, that the desert sun and wind had been working on them for 15 years, since the copper played out and the company pulled up stakes. But Katherine had been so thirsty after her morning ride, and the old office had a cistern that still held rainwater from the monsoons. She had thought she would just duck inside for a moment, fill her canteen, and ride back to her father's ranch before anyone noticed. She had gone exploring where she should not. Now she was going to die here alone, and no one would even know where to look for her. The thought crystallized in her mind with terrible clarity. Her father would search, of course, but Agua Caliente sat in a valley surrounded by thousands of square miles of desert and scrubland. The old Copper Queen mine was 5 miles from the ranch house, and she had told no one she was riding this direction. Her horse had bolted when the roof came down, probably already halfway back to the barn by now, which would bring her father running, but running where? He could search for days and never think to look in this particular ruin. Katherine tried to move her trapped leg and immediately regretted it. The pain was so intense that black spots danced across her vision and bile rose in her throat. She forced herself to breathe slowly through her nose, waiting for the agony to subside to something merely unbearable. Broken, she thought. Definitely broken. Maybe her ribs too, from the sharp stabbing sensation each breath brought. And she was bleeding somewhere. She could feel the warm wetness spreading beneath her, soaking into her cotton shirt. The November sun of 1882 was already heating the desert, and Katherine could feel the temperature rising even in the shadows beneath the rubble. By midday, it would be an oven. By nightfall, if she survived that long, it would be freezing. She had no water, no food, and no way to free herself. She would die here. 22 years old, and she would die under a pile of rotting wood and rusted tin because she had been too stubborn to listen to her father's warnings. No. The word formed in Katherine's mind with fierce determination. No, she would not just give up and die. Not without trying everything she could think of first. Her right hand was free. That was something. Katherine forced herself to focus on that small mercy. She could move her fingers, could flex her hand, could reach a few inches in any direction. The question was, what could she do with that limited mobility? She tried pushing against the timber pinning her shoulder, but it would not budge. The entire structure had collapsed in on itself, and she lacked the leverage to shift even one board. She tried again, straining until sweat broke out on her forehead and her vision grayed at the edges, but the rubble might as well have been solid stone for all the good it did. Katherine let her hand fall back to the floor, panting through the pain. "Think," she commanded herself. "Think like Papa taught you. What would he do?" Her father, Samuel Morgan, had survived the California Gold Rush, 3 years as a cavalry scout in Apache country, and the hardscrabble work of building a ranch in the Arizona Territory from nothing. He had taught Katherine to think like a survivor, to never give up while breath remained in her body. What would he tell her now? Make noise. The thought came to her like his voice in her ear. If you cannot move, make noise. Let someone know you are here. But who would hear her? The old mine was abandoned, the nearest ranch miles away. Still, it was something to do, some action to take besides lying here waiting to die. Katherine filled her lungs as much as her damaged ribs would allow and screamed for help. The sound seemed to die almost instantly, swallowed by the rubble and the vast emptiness of the desert. She screamed again anyway, and again, until her throat was raw and her voice cracked to nothing. Then she lay panting in the dust and darkness, listening to the terrible silence that followed. No response. No sound of horses or voices or anything human. Just the whisper of wind through the broken boards and the distant cry of a hawk somewhere overhead. Katherine's hand touched something on the floor near her face. A piece of metal, she realized, running her fingers over it. One of the tin roofing panels, bent and twisted but still recognizably a sheet of corrugated metal about 6 inches wide. She grasped it and tried to use it as a lever against the timber on her shoulder, but the metal just bent further without moving the wood. But metal makes sound, she thought. Metal on metal or metal on stone makes sound that carries. There was a rock embedded in the floor near her hand, part of the foundation. Katherine tapped the sheet of tin against it experimentally. The sound was sharp, clear, carrying in a way her ruined voice could not. She tapped it again 3 times in quick succession. Then again and again. Tap, 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 tap. It was something. A pattern, a signal, a message to anyone who might possibly be near enough to hear. I am here, I am alive, please help me. She had no idea if anyone would hear it. Probably no one would. But it was all she had, and so Katherine tapped, counting out a rhythm in sets of 3 because her father had once told her that patterns were easier for the human ear to distinguish from random noise. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. She kept it up until exhaustion dragged at her like an anchor, and her hand could barely lift the metal anymore. Then she let herself rest, drifting in and out of consciousness as the day grew hotter, and her thirst became a living thing that clawed at her throat. Time lost meaning. The sliver of sunlight she could see moved across the rubble, marking the hours in a bright line that crept from one side of her vision to the other. Katherine drifted in and out of fevered dreams where her mother was still alive, where the ranch was prosperous, where she had never ridden out to the old mine at all. She woke gasping, confused, the reality of her situation crashing down on her as heavily as the roof had. When she had enough strength, she tapped again. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 a prayer without words, a message in a bottle cast into an empty ocean. Please, Katherine thought, please let someone hear me, please do not let me die here alone. The sun began to set, the sliver of light fading to orange and then to purple and then to black. The temperature plummeted as the desert gave up its heat to the cloudless sky. Katherine shivered in the darkness, her body going numb in some places and screaming with pain in others. She could no longer feel her trapped leg at all, which terrified her more than the pain had. She tapped anyway. Even though her hand was so weak she could barely hold the metal. Even though she could no longer tell if she was making any sound at all. She tapped because it was the only thing keeping her tethered to life, the only action that said she had not given up yet, Tap, tap, tap. I am here. Tap, tap, tap. I am alive. Tap, tap, tap. Please find me. Sometime in the depths of that first endless night, Katherine heard a sound that made her heart leap with desperate hope. Hoofbeats. Distant, but definitely hoofbeats. A horse moving at a walk somewhere not too far away. She tried to scream again, but her ruined throat produced only a croak. She tapped frantically instead, abandoning her careful pattern for a wild staccato that said, "Please, please, please hear me, help me, I am here, I am here." The hoofbeats came closer, paused, and then moved away, fading into the distance until Katherine could no longer hear them at all. She wept then, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face. Someone had been so close, so achingly close, and had not heard her, had not known she was dying just yards away. When the tears finally stopped, Katherine went back to tapping. What else could she do? She tapped until she fell into unconsciousness again, until the sun rose on the second day and heat began building once more in her tomb of broken timber and adobe. Thirst consumed her now. It was worse than the pain, worse than the fear, a desiccating agony that shriveled her tongue and made every breath feel like inhaling sand. Katherine thought longingly of the cistern she had been trying to reach when the roof collapsed. She could almost see it in her fevered imagination, cool, clear water just a few feet away, close enough to touch if only she could move. But she could not move, and the water might as well have been on the moon. She tapped anyway. Weaker now, barely able to lift the metal, but she tapped. Some stubborn part of her refused to quit, kept insisting that as long as she could still make that small sound, she was not dead yet. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. The second day was worse than the first in every way Katherine could imagine. The heat was more intense, her thirst more agonizing, her strength more depleted. She drifted in and out of consciousness, no longer sure what was real and what was hallucination. At one point, she was certain her mother was there, stroking her hair and singing the lullaby she had sung when Katherine was a child. At another, she was convinced she was drowning in the cistern, water filling her lungs, and she woke gasping only to remember that there was no water, that she was dying of thirst instead. She had stopped tapping. She realized that at some point during the afternoon of the second day, when awareness returned enough for coherent thought, her hand lay limp on the floor, the sheet of tin still clutched in her fingers but motionless. Tap, she commanded herself. Tap or die. With what felt like the last dregs of her will, Katherine lifted the metal and brought it down against the stone. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound seemed impossibly distant, as if someone else was making it. She let her hand fall again, too exhausted to continue. Maybe this was it. Maybe she had fought as long as she could, and now it was time to let go. Her father would understand. Her mother would be waiting on the other side. It would not be so bad, would it, to just close her eyes and let the darkness take her? Katherine was sliding down into that darkness, ready to surrender at last, when she heard something that pulled her back from the edge, a voice. A man's voice, rough and uncertain, calling out, "Hello, someone there." Quentin Prescott had been tracking the wild Mustang stallion for 3 days, following the horse's trail across some of the most God-forsaken country in the Arizona Territory. He was a long way from his usual range, farther east than he normally worked. But the stallion was a magnificent animal, and Quentin had become just stubborn enough about catching it that he was willing to follow it into Agua Caliente country. The horse had led him through arroyos and across mesas, always staying just ahead, close enough that Quentin could see him but never close enough to rope. It was the kind of chase that tested a man's patience and skill in equal measure, and Quentin was enjoying it despite the hardship. At 25, he had been working as a ranch hand and horsebreaker for 8 years. and there was nothing he loved more than matching wits with a clever horse. But then his own mount had thrown a shoe, and Quentin had been forced to abandon the chase and head for the nearest settlement to find a blacksmith. That was how he found himself riding through the outskirts of the old Copper Queen mine, as the sun set on what he figured was his second day in the Agua Caliente Valley. He had heard the stories about the abandoned mine, how it had played out after just 5 years of operation, leaving behind a ghost town of empty buildings and rusting equipment. Most folks gave it a wide berth, saying it was bad luck to go poking around in the bones of failed dreams. But Quentin was not superstitious, and the old mine offered some shelter from the wind that was picking up as evening approached. He had just started looking for a spot to make camp when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it, almost dismissed it as a trick of the wind on metal. But something made him rein in his horse and sit still, listening. There. Again. A rhythmic tapping, 3 beats in a row, then silence, then 3 beats again. Quentin frowned, turning his head to try to locate the source. It was coming from one of the collapsed buildings, he thought, the old office structure that looked like it had caved in recently. The timbers were weathered gray, but the way they had fallen was fresh, without the settled look of a ruin that had been sitting for years. He urged his horse closer, and the tapping stopped. "Hello," Quentin called out, feeling foolish but unable to shake the sense that something was wrong here. Someone there. Silence. Maybe he had imagined it after all. Maybe it was just the wind banging a loose piece of tin against a rock. But then he heard it again, and this time there was no mistaking it. Not a random sound, but a deliberate pattern, and fainter than before, as if whoever was making it was running out of strength. Quentin swung down from his horse and moved toward the collapsed building, his heart starting to pound. Someone was under there. Someone was trapped under all that rubble, and they were still alive enough to make noise. "Hold on," he called out, dropping to his knees at the edge of the debris field. "I hear you. I am going to get you out." He had no idea if whoever was under there could hear him, but he said it anyway. Then he started pulling away boards, working as quickly as he dared, trying to clear a path without bringing more of the structure down on top of whoever was trapped. The work was slow and dangerous. The entire thing was unstable, timbers leaning against each other in a precarious balance that could shift at any moment. Quentin had to test each piece before he moved it, had to be sure he was not about to cause another collapse. Sweat poured down his face despite the cooling evening air, and splinters drove into his palms, but he kept working. He had cleared away perhaps 3 feet of debris when he saw a hand. A woman's hand, small and covered in dust, clutching a bent piece of tin roofing. "I see you," Quentin said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just hold on. I am almost there." The hand moved slightly, the fingers flexing, and Quentin worked faster. He pulled away another timber, then another, creating an opening large enough that he could see into the cavity where she was trapped. The light was fading, but he could make out her face, pale beneath the dust, her eyes open and watching him with an expression that was part hope and part disbelief. "Hello there," Quentin said, giving her what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "Seems you have gotten yourself into a bit of trouble." She tried to speak, but only a croak came out. Quentin nodded, understanding. "Do not try to talk. Just stay still and let me work. I am going to get you out of there, I promise." It took another hour of careful, painstaking labor. The light failed completely, and Quentin had to work by feel, and by the light of a small fire he built nearby. He could hear her breathing, shallow and pained, and it drove him to keep going even when his muscles screamed for rest. He talked to her while he worked, a steady stream of words meant to keep her conscious and aware. "My name is Quentin Prescott. I am from over Prescott Way originally, though I have been working ranches all over the territory these past few years. Right now I am supposed to be chasing a Mustang stallion, but he threw my horse, and I guess that makes me lucky because otherwise I never would have heard you. You have been making that tapping sound, right? Smart thinking. That is how I found you." No response from beneath the rubble, but he could see her eyes tracking his movements, and that was enough. "I am going to have to shift this big beam next," Quentin said, examining the main timber that was pinning her lower body. "It is going to hurt when I do." "I am sorry about that, but I cannot leave you under it. You understand?" A slight movement that might have been a nod. "All right then. On three. 1, 2, 3, Quentin heaved, putting his back and shoulders into it. The beam shifted with a groan of tortured wood, rolling to the side, and the woman made a sound that cut through him like a knife. But it was done, and suddenly she was free. Quentin reached in and very carefully pulled her out of the cavity, cradling her in his arms as he backed away from the unstable structure. She was light, too light, and he could feel her trembling with pain and shock. He carried her to his bedroll by the fire and laid her down as gently as he could manage. In the firelight he could see the extent of her injuries. Her left leg was badly broken, bent at an angle that made his stomach turn. Her shirt was soaked with blood from a gash in her shoulder, and he could see the dark bruising across her ribs that spoke of internal damage. She had been under that rubble for at least a day, probably longer, without water or medical attention. It was a miracle she was still alive. "Water," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Right, of course." Quentin grabbed his canteen and supported her head, letting her take tiny sips. Not too much, not too fast, even though he could see the desperate thirst in her eyes. "Slow now. I know you want more, but you have to take it slow, or you will just get sick." When she had taken as much as he dared give her for now, Quentin set about examining her injuries more carefully. The leg was the worst of it, and it would need to be set and splinted before he could even think about moving her. The shoulder wound had mostly stopped bleeding but would need to be cleaned and bandaged, and she was probably suffering from dehydration and exposure on top of everything else. "I need to know your name," Quentin said as he worked, tearing strips from his spare shirt to make bandages. "And I need to know if anyone is looking for you where you live, who I can contact." "Katherine," she whispered. "Katherine Morgan. My father, Samuel Morgan, has a ranch about 5 miles southwest of here. He will be looking for me." "How long have you been trapped?" 2 days, I think. Hard to tell. 2 days. Quentin felt a surge of anger at the thought of her lying there for 2 days, suffering, while he had been chasing a damned horse across the desert. But the anger was useless, so he pushed it aside and focused on what he could do now. "All right, Katherine Morgan. I am going to set your leg now. It is going to hurt worse than anything you have ever felt, and I am sorry for that, but it has to be done or you could lose the leg. Do you understand?" She nodded, her jaw clenched. Quentin found 2 straight pieces of wood in the debris and positioned them on either side of her leg. Then, as gently as possible but with the firmness required to do the job right, he pulled the broken bone back into alignment and splinted the leg, binding it tightly with strips of cloth. Katherine screamed, a raw sound that echoed across the empty desert, and then went limp in his arms. Unconscious. Maybe that was better. At least she would not feel the pain for a little while. Quentin finished his work and then sat back, wiping sweat from his forehead. She needed a doctor, and soon. He could ride for the Morgan ranch, bring her father back with a wagon, but that would take hours, and he was not sure she had hours to spare. Better to stabilize her here, let her rest a bit, and then see if she was strong enough to ride double with him come morning. He built up the fire and wrapped her in his blanket, doing everything he could to keep her warm and comfortable. Then he sat beside her through the night, watching her breathe, praying that she would hold on until he could get her home. Katherine woke to find herself staring up at a sky full of stars, more stars than she had ever seen, or maybe she had just never noticed them before. For a moment, she could not remember where she was or what had happened. Then the pain reminded her, a dull, roaring ache that seemed to encompass her entire body, and memory flooded back. The roof, the collapse, 2 days of darkness and despair, and then a voice, a man's voice, and hands pulling her free. She turned her head and saw him sitting by the fire, a tall, lean figure silhouetted against the flames. He had his back to her, staring out into the darkness as if keeping watch for something. As if keeping watch over her. "You are awake," he said without turning around. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was crushed by a building," Katherine managed, her voice still rough. He turned then, and in the firelight she got her first clear look at her rescuer. He was young, not much older than she was, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that reflected the flames. His face was lean and weathered, the face of a man who spent his life outdoors, and there was something both gentle and strong in the way he looked at her. "That is fair," Quentin said with a slight smile. "You were crushed by a building, but you are alive, and that is something. You saved my life. I heard you tapping. That was smart, making that sound. I never would have known you were there otherwise." Katherine tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her ribs. Quentin was beside her in an instant, supporting her shoulders, helping her ease into a position that hurt slightly less. "Easy now. You have got broken ribs to go with that broken leg, and probably a concussion too from the way you have been in and out of consciousness. You need to stay still and rest." "My father," Katherine said. "He will be worried sick. He does not know where I am." "I know. You told me, Samuel Morgan, ranch 5 miles southwest. As soon as you are strong enough to travel, I will take you home. But it is the middle of the night now, and you need rest. Come morning, we will figure out the best way to get you to your family." He gave her more water and a few bites of jerky from his saddlebag, though she could barely swallow the dried meat. Then he settled her back down in the bedroll and added more wood to the fire. "Thank you," Katherine whispered. "I thought I was going to die there. I thought no one would ever find me." "But someone did," Quentin said quietly. "Sometimes that is how it works. You hold on just long enough and help arrives." She wanted to say more, wanted to know more about this man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life, but exhaustion was pulling her down again. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Quentin settling himself beside the fire, keeping watch through the night. When dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Quentin was already up and moving. He checked Katherine's injuries, gave her more water and some hardtack soaked in water to make it easier to eat, and then faced the problem of how to transport her. His horse was not big enough to carry both of them for 5 miles, not with Katherine injured and needing to be held steady. But there was no wagon, no travois, no way to make the journey easier. They would just have to do their best. "This is going to be rough," Quentin warned as he prepared to lift her onto the horse. "But your father needs to know you are alive and you need a doctor. We cannot wait." Katherine nodded, steeling herself. When Quentin lifted her, pain exploded through her broken leg despite the splint, and she bit her lip until she tasted blood to keep from crying out. He settled her in front of the saddle and then swung up behind her, one arm wrapped securely around her waist to hold her in place. "I have got you," he murmured in her ear. "Just lean back against me and try to stay relaxed. I will not let you fall." The ride was agony. Every step the horse took jarred Katherine's injuries, sending fresh waves of pain through her body. But Quentin held her steady, his arm like an iron band around her waist, his voice a low murmur of encouragement in her ear. He talked to her the whole way, telling her stories about his life, about the horses he had broken, about the time he had been thrown into a water trough by a particularly mean-spirited bronco. Anything to distract her from the pain. Katherine focused on his voice, on the warmth of his body behind hers, on the solid strength of his arm holding her safe. She had never been this close to a man who was not her father, and part of her mind that was not consumed with pain found it strange and unsettling, and somehow comforting all at once. They had been riding for what felt like hours when Quentin suddenly tensed behind her. "Riders coming," he said. 3 of them, moving fast. Katherine forced her eyes open and saw the dust cloud approaching from the southwest. Her heart leaped. "That will be my father," she said. "He must have found my horse, tracked it this far." Sure enough, as the riders drew closer, Katherine could make out her father's distinctive black gelding in the lead. Samuel Morgan rode like a man possessed, his 2 ranch hands struggling to keep up. When he was close enough to see Katherine in Quentin's arms, he let out a shout and spurred his horse to even greater speed. "Katherine!" Her father pulled up in a spray of dust and was off his horse before it had fully stopped, reaching up to take his daughter from Quentin's arms. "My God, Katherine, we have been searching for 2 days. Where were you? What happened?" "The old mine office," Katherine said, and the relief of being in her father's arms made her voice break. "The roof collapsed. I was trapped. This man, Quentin Prescott, he heard me and dug me out." Samuel Morgan was a hard man, made hard by the territory and the life he had lived, but tears streaked his dusty face as he held his daughter. Then he looked up at Quentin, still sitting his horse, and the expression on his face was one of profound gratitude. "You saved my daughter's life." "I heard her tapping," Quentin said simply. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone. Most men would never have heard it or would have dismissed it as nothing. You listened and you acted, and for that you have my eternal gratitude. Come back to the ranch with us. Let us tend to you as you have tended to Katherine. It is the least we can do." One of the ranch hands had brought a buckboard, and they made a bed in the back with saddle blankets. Samuel held Katherine as tenderly as if she were made of glass, while Quentin and the ranch hands made her as comfortable as possible for the journey home. The Morgan Ranch house was a sprawling adobe structure built around a central courtyard, with thick walls and deep windows designed to keep out the desert heat. Samuel carried Katherine to her own room, a space she had not seen in 3 days that now felt like the greatest luxury in the world. A real bed with a feather mattress, clean sheets, a window that looked out on the mountains. The doctor was sent for, a gruff old man named Henderson who had been practicing medicine in the territory for 30 years. He examined Katherine's injuries with thorough efficiency while her father paced the hallway outside and Quentin waited in the courtyard, feeling out of place but unable to make himself leave until he knew she would be all right. "She will live," Dr. Henderson pronounced when he finally emerged. "The leg is well set. Whoever did the splinting knew what they were doing. The ribs will heal on their own with rest. The shoulder wound needs to be watched for infection, but it is clean enough. She was very lucky. Another day or 2 under that rubble and we would be having a different conversation." Samuel clasped Quentin's shoulder hard enough to leave bruises. "You heard that. You saved her life. There is no doubt about it. You will stay here until she recovers. I insist. We have a guest room, food, anything you need. It is the least I can do to repay the debt I owe you." Quentin started to protest, to say he needed to get back to his work, but Samuel's expression brooked no argument. And truth be told, Quentin found he did not want to leave. Not yet. Not until he knew for certain that Katherine Morgan would recover. "I would be honored," he said. "Thank you." The days that followed took on a rhythm. Quentin helped around the ranch, working with the horses and mending fences, making himself useful. He was good with his hands and a natural horseman, and the ranch hands quickly accepted him as one of their own. But every evening, after supper, Samuel would invite him to sit in Catherine's room for a spell, saying it did her good to have company. At first, Catherine slept most of the time, exhausted from her ordeal and heavy with the laudanum Dr. Henderson had prescribed for the pain. But as the days passed and her strength began to return, she was awake more and more, and Quentin found himself looking forward to those evening visits with an eagerness he did not fully understand. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. Catherine told him about growing up on the ranch, about her mother who had died of pneumonia 5 years ago, about her dreams of maybe one day seeing San Francisco or even Denver. Quentin told her about his life as a drifting ranch hand, never staying in one place more than a season or two, always chasing the next job or the next challenge. "You ever get lonely?" Catherine asked one evening when they had been talking for nearly 2 hours. Moving around so much, never having a real home, Quentin considered the question. He was sitting in the chair beside her bed, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes when the lamplight caught them. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I figure a man makes his own home, you know. It is not about the place so much as what you do with your life." "I used to think I wanted to leave here," Catherine said quietly. "Go somewhere exciting, somewhere that was not just dust and cattle and the same faces day after day. But when I was trapped under that building, all I could think about was home, about my father and this ranch and how stupid I had been to not appreciate what I had." "You were not stupid. You were young and curious and adventurous. Those are not bad things. They almost got me killed. But they did not. You survived, and now you get to decide what comes next." Catherine looked at him for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "What about you? What comes next for Quentin Prescott?" He should have said he would move on soon, head back to Prescott, or maybe down to Tucson where he had heard they were hiring hands for the big ranches. That was what he always did, what he had been doing for 8 years. But looking at Catherine, at the way her dark hair fell across her shoulders and the stubborn set of her jaw even when she was injured and confined to bed, Quentin found himself saying something different. "I do not know yet. I guess I am still figuring that out." It was Samuel who first noticed what was developing between his daughter and the young cowboy who had saved her life. He saw it in the way Quentin's face lit up when he entered Catherine's room each evening. He saw it in the way Catherine started taking more care with her appearance as she healed, asking the housekeeper to bring her good dresses instead of nightgowns, pinning up her hair even though she was confined to bed. He saw it, and he was not entirely sure how he felt about it. On the one hand, Quentin Prescott was clearly a good man. Honest, hardworking, brave enough to dig a woman out of a collapsed building and capable enough to keep her alive until she could get proper medical care. Those were not small things. On the other hand, he was a drifter, a man with no roots and no prospects beyond the next job. Was that the kind of man Samuel wanted for his daughter? But then Samuel would remember the look on Catherine's face when she thought Quentin was not watching. A soft expression that he had never seen her direct toward any of the local boys who had tried to court her over the years. And he would remember that Catherine was 22 years old and more than capable of making her own decisions about her life. So he said nothing, and he watched, and he waited to see what would develop. 6 weeks after the collapse, Catherine was finally allowed out of bed. Her leg was still in a splint, and she needed crutches to move around, but just being able to leave her room felt like the greatest freedom she had ever known. The first thing she did was go outside to the courtyard and stand in the sunshine, tilting her face up to the warmth and breathing in the clean desert air. Quentin was there, working with a young colt in the breaking pen. He looked up when he heard the door and broke into a grin when he saw her standing there. "Look at you," he called. "You are up and moving around. Dr. Henderson finally gave me permission. I think if I had spent one more day in that room, I might have gone mad." Quentin tied off the colt and walked over to the courtyard, wiping his hands on his trousers. He looked good, Katherine thought. Lean and strong in the afternoon sun, his hair falling across his forehead the way it always did. Over the past 6 weeks, she had gotten to know him better than she had ever known anyone outside her immediate family, and she had come to realize something that both excited and terrified her. She was falling in love with him. "Your father says you should be able to get the splint off in another few weeks," Quentin said. "Then you will be good as new." "I will never be quite the same," Katherine said, looking down at her leg. "Dr. Henderson says I will probably walk with a limp for the rest of my life." "Does that bother you?" It did at first. "Now I am just grateful to be alive. The limp seems like a small price to pay for that." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the colt in the pen. Then Katherine gathered her courage and said what she had been thinking about for days. "Quentin, my father says you have turned down the wages he has offered for your work here." "Why?" Quentin looked uncomfortable. "I did not come here to work for pay. I came here because your father asked me to stay, and it seemed like the right thing to do. But you have been here 6 weeks. You have been working dawn to dusk, helping with the horses, mending equipment, doing everything a regular ranch hand would do. You should be paid for that." "I do not need payment. Your father is giving me room and board, that is enough." Katherine shifted her weight on the crutches, frustrated. "Is it that you do not need the money, or is it that you do not want to be tied to this place? Are you planning to leave as soon as I am fully healed?" The question hung in the air between them. Quentin looked away, staring out at the mountains that ringed the valley. "I have always been a drifter," he said quietly. "I never stayed in one place more than a season. I never saw the point in putting down roots when there was always another job, another challenge, another place to see just over the next hill." "That is not an answer to my question." "No," Quentin agreed. "I guess it is not." He turned to face her, and there was something in his eyes that made Katherine's heart beat faster. "The truth is, I do not know what I am planning anymore. 6 weeks ago I thought I knew exactly what my life looked like. Now everything feels different and I cannot figure out why." "I think I know why," Katherine said softly. "Do you?" "I think it is the same reason I have been waking up every morning excited to start the day, even though I have been stuck in bed with nothing to do but stare at the ceiling. I think it is the same reason I find myself listening for your footsteps in the hallway every evening. I think it is the same reason I have been dreading the day when Dr. Henderson declares me fully healed, because that will mean you do not have a reason to stay anymore." Quentin stepped closer, close enough that Katherine could see the way his pulse beat in his throat. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough, "I should not. You deserve better than a drifting cowboy with nothing to his name but a horse and a saddle." "Maybe I should get to decide what I deserve," Katherine said. "Maybe I should get to decide if a brave, kind, honest man who saved my life and then stayed to make sure I recovered is exactly what I want. Your father would not approve. My father is not the one falling in love with you." The words were out before Katherine could stop them, hanging in the air like a confession. Quentin stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and something that looked very much like hope. "You are falling in love with me." "I have been falling in love with you since the first moment. I woke up under that rubble and saw you pulling away the timbers to reach me. I have been falling in love with you through every conversation we have had, every story you have told, every moment you have spent here helping my father's ranch as if it were your own. So yes, Quentin Prescott, I am falling in love with you, and if you are planning to drift away over the next hill without at least acknowledging what is happening between us, I am going to be extremely angry." Quentin started to laugh, a sound of pure joy and relief. "Well, we cannot have that. You are terrifying when you are angry. I have never been angry around you. I know. I am trying to keep it that way." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I am falling in love with you too," he said quietly. "I think I have been since I heard you tapping under all that rubble, fighting to stay alive. I just did not know what to do about it. I do not know how to be the kind of man who stays in one place, who builds something permanent. I have never done that before." "So learn," Katherine said. "Stay here. Work for my father not as a guest but as a ranch hand, a real part of this place. Give us a chance to see what this could become. What if I fail? What if I am not good at staying? Then you will have tried, and that will be more than most people ever do." "But I do not think you will fail, Quentin. I think you have just been waiting for a reason to stop drifting. Maybe I can be that reason." Quentin pulled her closer, careful of her injured leg, and rested his forehead against hers. "You are already that reason," he whispered. "You have been from the moment I pulled you out of that rubble. I just needed to hear you say you felt it too." When he kissed her, Katherine thought her heart might burst from the sheer rightness of it. This was what she had been waiting for, what she had been hoping for through all those long evenings of conversation, and all those moments of wondering if he felt what she felt. This was real and true and absolutely terrifying in the best possible way. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Katherine was grinning. "So you will stay?" "I will stay, at least for now. We will see how it goes." "Fair enough. That is all I am asking." Samuel Morgan watched from the window of his study and allowed himself a small smile. He had known this was coming for weeks, had seen it building between his daughter and the young cowboy, and he had made his peace with it. Quentin was a good man, and more importantly, he made Katherine happy in a way she had never been before. That was worth more than prospects or roots or anything else Samuel might have wanted for his daughter. He would give them his blessing when they asked for it, and he had a feeling they would be asking soon. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Katherine's life. Her leg healed slowly. The limp Dr. Henderson had predicted becoming a permanent part of her gait, but not enough to slow her down significantly. She learned to adapt, to move differently, and found that the injury bothered her far less than she had feared. Quentin settled into life on the Morgan ranch with surprising ease. Samuel put him on the payroll as a full ranch hand, and Quentin proved his worth a dozen times over. He had a gift with horses that the other hands acknowledged with respect, and he worked from dawn to dusk without complaint. More than that, he fit into the rhythm of the ranch as if he had been born to it, becoming as much a part of the place as the cattle and the sagebrush and the mountains that ringed the valley. And every evening, after supper, he and Katherine would walk out to the courtyard and sit under the stars, talking and planning and dreaming about the future. "What do you think about building a house?" Quentin asked one night in early spring, a full 6 months after he had dug Katherine out of the collapsed mine office. "A place of our own, I mean. On the far edge of your father's land, near that spring I found last month." Katherine turned to look at him, her heart beating faster. "Our own house? Are you asking what I think you are asking?" Quentin reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a ring, simple silver with a small turquoise stone set in the center. "I am not good with fancy words," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I do not have much to offer you beyond my work and my word. But I love you, Katherine Morgan. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You are the reason I get up in the morning and the reason I stop drifting. You are my home, the first real home I have ever had." So I am asking, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here in this place? Tears streamed down Catherine's face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. Yes, she said. Yes, 1,000 times yes. I will marry you, Quentin Prescott, and I will build a life with you, and I will love you for as long as I draw breath. He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her under the desert stars. And Catherine thought that if she had to choose between never being trapped under that building or having it happen exactly as it did so that Quentin could find her, she would choose the same thing over again. Because some things were worth the suffering. Some things were worth everything. They were married on a warm day in June of 1883 in the courtyard of the Morgan Ranch, with Samuel presiding and every rancher and cowhand from 50 miles around in attendance. Catherine wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Quentin had ridden out at dawn to pick. When he saw her walking toward him on her father's arm, his eyes filled with tears, and Catherine knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Samuel gave his daughter away with tears in his own eyes, and then shook Quentin's hand so hard Catherine thought her new husband's fingers might break. "You take care of her," Samuel said gruffly. "She is the most precious thing in my world." "I know," Quentin replied. "She is the most precious thing in mine too." The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and enough food to feed half the territory. Catherine danced with Quentin until her leg ached, and then they slipped away from the party to stand alone under the stars, just the two of them. "Happy?" Quentin asked, his arms wrapped around her waist. "Happier than I have ever been," Catherine said. "Thank you for hearing me tapping. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for digging me out. Thank you for tapping. Thank you for fighting to stay alive. Thank you for giving me a reason to stop drifting." They stood together in the darkness, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something real and lasting from it. And Catherine sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for collapsed buildings and stubborn cowboys, and the hand of fate that had brought them together. The house Quentin had envisioned took shape over the next year. He and Samuel and the ranch hands built it with their own hands, using adobe bricks made from the earth of the Morgan land and timber hauled from the mountains. It was a modest structure, just 3 rooms and a covered porch, but it was theirs, and Catherine loved every inch of it. They moved in on their first anniversary, and that night, lying in their own bed in their own home, Catherine told Quentin the news she had been holding close for the past month. "I am with child," she said, watching his face in the moonlight that streamed through their window. "We are going to have a baby." The expression on Quentin's face was one of pure wonder. He placed his hand on her still flat belly and leaned down to kiss her. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" "I am terrified," Quentin admitted. "But yes, I am happy. I am so happy I cannot find words for it." Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1884, howling his displeasure at being thrust into the world. They named him Samuel, after Catherine's father, and from the moment Quentin held his son in his arms, Catherine knew that whatever doubts he might have once had about staying in one place were gone forever. He was a father now, and he took to the role with the same dedication he brought to everything else. Little Samuel was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Rose, after Catherine's mother. And 2 years after that, another son they called Thomas. The house had to be expanded to accommodate the growing family, and Quentin built on 2 more rooms and a larger kitchen with the help of Samuel Sr., who doted on his grandchildren with shameless abandon. The years passed in the way that happy years do, quickly and yet leaving behind a wealth of memories. Catherine taught the children to read and write at the table Quentin had built. Quentin taught them to ride almost as soon as they could walk. Samuel Sr. taught them about the land, about cattle and horses, and the hard work of making a living from the desert. On warm evenings, the whole family would gather on the porch, and Quentin would tell stories about his years as a drifter, about the places he had seen, and the adventures he had experienced. But he always ended with the same story, the one about how he heard a woman tapping under a collapsed building and stopped to investigate. "That was the day my real life started," he would say, pulling Katherine close. "Everything before that was just prologue." Samuel Sr. passed away in the winter of 1892, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68. Katherine grieved for her father, but she also knew that he had died happy, surrounded by the family he loved, secure in the knowledge that his ranch would continue under Quentin's capable management. He had told her as much just a few days before his death. "I could not have chosen better for you if I had searched the whole territory," Samuel had said, his voice weak but firm. "Quentin is a good man, and he has given you a good life. I am proud of both of you." Those words were a comfort to Katherine in the dark days after her father's death. She held them close and repeated them to herself when the grief threatened to overwhelm her. And slowly, with Quentin's steady presence beside her and the needs of 3 active children demanding her attention, the pain faded to a manageable ache. Quentin took over the running of the ranch fully, and under his management it prospered. He had learned much from Samuel over the years, and he added his own innovations, improving the breeding stock and expanding into horse raising as well as cattle. The Morgan Ranch became known throughout the territory for the quality of its animals, and buyers came from as far as California to purchase horses trained by Quentin Prescott. The children grew. Samuel Jr. turned out to have his father's gift with horses and his mother's stubborn determination. By the time he was 16, he could gentle a horse as well as any man twice his age. Rose inherited her grandmother's beauty and her grandfather's business sense, keeping the ranch accounts with meticulous precision. Thomas was the quiet one, content to spend hours reading or exploring the desert, collecting rocks and fossils and bits of old mining equipment. They were good children, happy children, and watching them grow into capable young adults filled Katherine with a satisfaction that went bone deep. This was what she and Quentin had built together. A family, a home, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Quentin took Katherine back to the site of the old Copper Queen mine. The collapsed building where she had been trapped was long gone, weathered away to nothing by 2 decades of desert wind and rain. But the location was still there, marked now by a cairn of stones that Quentin had built years ago. "I come here sometimes," Quentin admitted as they stood looking at the cairn, "when I need to remember how lucky I am, how easily things could have gone differently." "We are both lucky," Katherine said, taking his hand. "I was lucky you heard me. You were lucky you stopped to investigate. We were lucky your horse threw a shoe and brought you to this place at exactly the right time." "I do not believe in luck anymore," Quentin said. "I believe in fate. I believe you were meant to be trapped under that building, and I was meant to hear you, and everything that came after was meant to happen exactly as it did." That is a dangerous philosophy. It means all the suffering was meant to happen too, maybe. But it also means all the joy was meant to happen, and I will take 2 days of you suffering if it means 20 years of us being together. I know that sounds selfish, but it is the truth. Katherine leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "It does not sound selfish. It sounds honest. And I feel the same way. I would do it all again, even knowing what I would have to endure, because the alternative is a life without you. And that is unthinkable." They stood together in the fading light, two people who had been brought together by catastrophe and built a love that had lasted 2 decades. And Katherine knew, with the certainty that comes from a life well lived, that their love would last decades more. The years continued their march. Samuel Jr. married a schoolteacher from Tucson and brought her home to the ranch, where Quentin built them a house not far from his own. Rose married a lawyer from Phoenix and moved to the city, though she visited often and always brought her children back to the ranch for the summer. Thomas surprised everyone by going to college in California, studying geology, though he promised he would return to Arizona when his studies were complete. Quentin and Katherine grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming something richer and more complex than the passionate attraction of their youth. They still walked together in the evenings, though now they moved more slowly, and Quentin's arm around Katherine's waist was as much for support as affection. They still talked for hours, though now the conversations were often about the past rather than the future, reminiscing about the years they had shared. On a warm spring evening in 1908, 26 years after Quentin had dug Katherine out of that collapsed building, they sat on the porch of their home and watched the sun set over the mountains. Grandchildren played in the yard, Samuel Jr.'s 2 boys and Rose's daughter, their laughter carrying across the desert evening. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Katherine asked, her head resting on Quentin's shoulder. "When you were sitting by the fire, keeping watch." "I said a lot of things that night. Which part are you thinking of?" "You said that sometimes you just have to hold on long enough for help to arrive. That has always stuck with me. It is good advice for more than just being trapped under a building." "Is that what you have been doing? Holding on?" "We both have, I think. Life is not always easy, even when it is good. We have had our share of struggles, but we held on and we had each other, and that made all the difference." Quentin kissed the top of her head, a gesture he had made 1,000 times over the years. "I am glad I heard you tapping," he said quietly. "I am glad you stopped to listen." They sat together as the stars began to emerge one by one until the sky was full of them. And Katherine thought about all the paths her life might have taken, all the ways things could have gone differently. But this was the path she had walked, and it had led her to this moment, to this man, to this life full of love and family and purpose. She would not change a single thing. The years continued to pass, as they always do. Quentin and Katherine celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th, then their 40th. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family that included children and grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch prospered under the management of Samuel Jr., who had inherited both his father's skill and his work ethic. They slowed down, as all people must, their bodies no longer capable of the work they had once done with ease. But their minds remained sharp, and their love remained strong, and they faced the indignities of aging with the same partnership that had carried them through everything else. Quentin died on a quiet morning in the spring of 1915, in his sleep, with Katherine's hand in his. He was 58 years old, which seemed far too young to Katherine, but which the doctor assured her was a good long life for a man who had worked as hard as Quentin had. Katherine grieved, but she also knew that she had been blessed. 33 years of marriage to a man who had loved her completely, who had never once regretted the choice to stop drifting and build a life with her. 33 years of partnership and passion, and the deep contentment that comes from being exactly where you are meant to be with exactly the person you are meant to be with. She lived another 10 years, long enough to see all her grandchildren grown and several of her great-grandchildren born. She stayed in the house Quentin had built, surrounded by the memories of their life together, And every evening she would sit on the porch and look at the stars and feel his presence beside her. On the day she died, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 65, Katherine Morgan Prescott's last thought was of a young cowboy digging through rubble to reach her, of his voice calling out that he would get her free, of the moment their eyes first met in the firelight and she knew her life had just changed forever. She had tapped and he had heard, and everything else had followed from that. A love story born from catastrophe, built on determination and trust, and lasting until the very end. The family buried her next to Quentin on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple marker that read, Katherine Morgan Prescott, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She held on long enough. And next to it, Quentin's marker, Quentin Prescott, beloved husband, father, grandfather. He heard her calling. And if sometimes, on quiet desert evenings, the current residents of the ranch thought they heard the sound of tapping coming from the old mine site, or saw two figures walking hand in hand under the stars, they smiled and said nothing. Some loves are too strong to be contained by a single lifetime. Some loves echo on forever, a testament to what two people can build when fate brings them together, and they have the courage to hold on. The Morgan Ranch continued to prosper through the generations, carried forward by the family that Katherine and Quentin had created. And always, the story was told to new children and grandchildren, the story of how their great-great-grandmother had been trapped under a collapsed building, and how their great-great-grandfather had heard her tapping and refused to ride away until he had dug her free. It became a legend in the family, a story about persistence and fate and the power of listening when others might have dismissed a sound as nothing important. It became a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures, the deepest loves, begin in the most unlikely circumstances. And it became a promise, passed down through the generations, that if you are ever trapped, if you ever find yourself in darkness with no way out, you should tap. You should make noise. You should fight to be heard, because somewhere someone might be listening. Someone might stop what they are doing and come to your aid. Someone might change your life forever if you just hold on long enough for them to find you. The cairn of stones at the old mine site remained standing through the decades, a marker of the place where two lives had intersected and become one. Family members would sometimes add a stone to the pile, or leave flowers, or just stand for a moment in silence, thinking about the love story that had begun in that spot. And far above, the stars continued to shine down on the Arizona desert, the same stars that Quentin and Katherine had watched together on so many evenings. They shone on the ranch that had been their home, on the family that had been their legacy, on the land that had witnessed their love story from beginning to end. Some stories end. Some stories fade away with time. But the best stories, the truest stories, the ones about real love and real courage and real determination, those stories last forever. They get told and retold, passed down through generations, becoming part of the fabric of a family's history. And on quiet nights in the Arizona desert, when the wind blows just right and the stars shine bright enough to see by, you can almost hear it. The sound of tapping, rhythmic and determined, calling out to anyone who will listen. And the sound of someone answering, a voice saying, I hear you. I am coming. Hold on. Because that is what love does. It hears when others do not. It answers when others turn away. It holds on when letting go would be easier. Katherine and Quentin proved that, across 33 years of marriage and decades more of their legacy carrying forward through their family. They proved that sometimes being trapped is not the end of the story but the beginning. They proved that sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the day everything changes for the better. They proved that love, real love, is worth fighting for, worth tapping for, worth digging through rubble to find. And their story, the story of a roof that collapsed and pinned her for 2 days, of a cowboy who heard her tapping and dug her out, became more than just their story. It became a testament to the power of not giving up, of listening carefully, of being in the right place at exactly the right time. It became a love story for the ages, told around family dinners and written in family Bibles and carved into the hearts of everyone who heard it. A reminder that sometimes, in the darkest moments, when you think all is lost and no one will ever find you, you just have to hold on a little longer. Because help might be coming. Love might be coming. Your entire future might be riding toward you across the desert, drawn by the sound of your determination to survive. You just have to tap, and someone just has to hear. And everything else, all the love and family and life that follows, grows from that single moment of connection. That single moment when one person refuses to give up and another person refuses to ride past without investigating. That is how love stories begin. Not always with grand gestures or love at first sight, but sometimes with something as simple as a sound in the darkness and the courage to stop and listen. Katherine tapped. Quentin heard. And from that moment, everything changed. That was their story. That was their legacy. And it would live on, passed down through generations, as long as there were Morgans and Prescotts to tell it. A love story born in catastrophe, built through determination, and lasting forever in the hearts of those who came after. The end of their mortal story, perhaps, but the beginning of something greater. A legend, a legacy, a love that would never die as long as someone remembered to tell the tale of the cowboy and the woman he saved, and how they built a life together that mattered. And in the end, is not that what we all hope for? To build a life that matters, to love and be loved in return, to leave behind something more than just our names carved on a stone. Katherine and Quentin did that. They lived fully, loved completely, and left behind a family and a story that would endure. Under the vast Arizona sky, the stars continued to shine. The desert continued its eternal cycles. And the love story of Katherine Morgan and Quentin Prescott remained, etched into the land and the family and the history of a place where miracles could still happen, where a woman could be trapped for 2 days, and a cowboy could hear her tapping and dig her out. And from that moment of crisis, a love could grow that would last through all the years to come. That was their gift to the world. That was their story, and it was complete.